Okay, let's have a go. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm typing, I guess. Okay, so we have the first stage is as Proto-Hanafi, Proto-Maliki stage. So if we go and look at this, what is happening here is we have the stage in fiqh where they're the students of Abdullah Mas'ud in Kufa. So these are the Kufans, i.e. the Kufans and the Medinans. Right. We're going to add, let's add this all the Meccans. So what's happening is we have this um, a style of fiqh where there are certain key Sahaba who have key people around them, and people are kind of following their madhhab. The word madhhab is used as Ali al-Madini. He uses this in the beginning of his Sharh, in his Ilal. He says that these Sahaba had madhabs, and people are يذهبون madhabahum. They're going in their madhabs, or yuftuna bi fatwahum, and following their fatawa. So we see that it's kind of a trend is happening. It's not just everybody doing their own thing. There's a kind of trend happening. So now there's this kind of concept of, there's people who have come before us and they've given fatwa like this. And there are other people who give fatwa that they're not that amazing, right? So there's muftis and there's muftis, right? So now there's like key muftis and key people are standing out. Um, so um, Imam Shafi comes into this world, and initially he's a kind of Maliki, basically, right? I mean, he studies in Mecca, but his his main influence initially is Maliki, meaning Madani. Okay, he's Madani. Um, so Medinan fiqh, right? So if we look at Medinan fiqh, a lot of his sources, like if you look, a lot of his hadith, you look at the Musnad Imam Ahmad and Musnad Imam Shafi'i, and you look at the Muwatta, a lot of the Muwatta is the same kind of thing. A lot of the ideas are very similar. There's a very heavy Medinan emphasis in the Shafi'i school, right? A lot of things, simply because it's a very strong school, right? So that's how he starts out. Um, and then there are some serious criticisms, right? Namely, things like Amal Ahmadina. Here, 1 second, the cat's gonna get up. So he's not, just like any advanced student, he doesn't agree 100% with the teacher. And so there's some major differences. So over time, Imam Shafi'i there's some major differences. Imam Shafi'i goes to Yemen and then goes to Iraq, is exposed also to Hanafi fiqh, right? So Hanafi fiqh, which is basically a organization of the fatwa of and kind of tarjih and balancing up of the fatwa of Abdullah Mas'ud and those of his circle and the next generation of his circle, right? So they're similar. Hanafi and in the idea that fiqh is based on Quran and Sunnah. Yes, but it's based on Quran and Sunnah through the lens of a tradition, through the lens of the tradition. And that lens could either be very big and very significant or very thin, if that makes sense. Right? So the lens that the Hanafis are looking at the Quran and Sunnah through is very much Kufan. Um, and the lens through which the Malikis are looking at the Quran and Sunnah is heavily Medinan, right? The weight of precedence is very important. I remember one of my teachers, Dr. Sam Nimr, he says, like the Hanafis, they will use a fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakhai as a proof. And it's like, why would they use that? Ibrahim al-Nakhai is one of the early tabi'een, great muftis of Kufa. Why? It's just because he's this giant, right? So like they'll say this giant gave this fatwa, khalas, that's the deen, no problem, right? And this almost more important than a hadith, and you know, so that's the world that Imam Shafi'i comes into, right? That people are relying on hadith, they're relying on the Quran, they're relying on fatwa of key Sahaba, key Tabi'in, etc. Right? That's the kind of the world that he's relying on. So then he travels to Yemen. He travels to to Iraq. He studies with he studies with Imam Muhammad, and he's greatly affected by Imam Muhammad. And then when in Iraq, he starts his own school. So his own school then basically is kind of so the Shafi school does not exist in a vacuum. That's the key thing. So it's basically a process of combining previous material. So what does that mean? It means that any mas'ala that Imam Shafi is thinking about, it already exists, right? So it's like Jawad, you do IT things, right? You do like coding and things,
Yes.
right? So like imagine if you invented coding, right? You'd be like the biggest genius ever, right? I don't even know if you could even do that, right? Like the person who invented coding, did he really invent coding? You know what I mean? Like he was part of a development somewhere, right? He's not really the actual originator because there are so many things that you need to do before that, right? So it'd be very difficult. Like Einstein, right? Einstein did not. He wasn't sitting there like, yeah, I honestly think that E equals mc squared. He's like at the end of a whole series of things that are happening, right? You know. So like, how are you? You didn't invent it. So that's what we have to understand is that Imam Shafi'i he has an editing process. Okay, why is that important? Because we're going to come along and define Imam Shafi'i's usul and then use it to destroy. Okay, we're going to come along and not edit. We're going to come and not say that there's this exists and that exists. Let's edit. Is instead of editing, we're going to build from scratch and destroy. Right. So if you can imagine, you come to my house and I say, listen, guys, I'm really, really busy. I need you to go around in my office and just find books that are in the wrong place and put them in the right place, right? As opposed to take all the books off the shelf, find out if they're printed by this place, and then everything that's not in its right place, get rid of it, and everything that's not printed by this thing, get rid of it. So one is very destructive, right? The editing process actually rips things apart, right? The other thing is if you just see it in the wrong place, move it. Like there's already books in the right place, but there are just some that are in the wrong place, if that makes sense, right? So he has this editing process. So Imam Shafi is there. He is in the second century, right, 150. A lot of things have already happened before him. There's already a Maliki school before him. There's already a Hanafi school. There's already nebulous schools like the Meccan school and the Meccan school, and to some extent the Egyptian school and the Shami, the Levantine schools. And he's looking at all of these things, and he says, "Okay, how do we compare these things?" So if I if I want to compare the Medinan school versus the Kufan school, I can't use Amal Ahmadina, right? That wouldn't make any sense. And if I'm or the Kufan, so I have to come up with a system that is higher than that, if that makes sense, right? Like there's already proof in both of those. I need something that's higher than that, right? So he comes down basically with he has his four proofs, right? So he has Quran, he has Sunnah, right? Meaning hadith. So Sunnah as well is a bit vague. He says hadith, Sunnah means hadith. That's what it means, right? Sunnah does not mean the precedent in general, meaning Sahaba and Tabi'in. It means specifically hadith, right? And then when we say hadith, we mean specifically Sahih hadith, right? Which uh, does not equal, I don't have the does not equal sign here, right? Which equals not a mursal hadith. Okay, so now we're getting to a bit more specifics. So he says, I'm going to compare the Maliki school, the Hanafi school, and other nebulous schools in view of the Quran, in view of the Hadith, which is not mursal. I'm also going to use certain tools with Quran and Sunnah. I'm going to use, for example, the right? Uh, so in language, I'm going to look at things like things being literal. That's assumed to be literal. I'm going to assume general statements are general, or assume, uh, assume universal statements. Um, etc. I'm going to do analogy because analogy. Um, okay. And I'm going to do consensus, whatever they agree on, right? Whatever they agree on, I'm going to say that's binding, right? And I'm not going to do things like fatwa of a Sahabi. So this is really important. Imam Shafi'i, he says fatwa Sahabi is not a proof. Really, really important point, right? Really, really important point because we see, if you look at it like the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, the student of Imam Abu Hassan, a student of Imam Abu Hanifa, he will, when he's mentioning proofs, he's kind of mentioning hadiths and fatwa, Sahaba and Tabi'een at the same time. He just calls it all athar, footprints, the footprints from before us. Like, so it's not really clear what he means by sunnah. Like, is sunnah what the Prophet ﷺ did, or what the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba did, or the Prophet ﷺ, Sahaba and Tabi'een? It's not very clear, right? Whereas Imam Shafi is like, no, these are two fundamental different things. One is a prophet, one's not a prophet, right? So Imam Shafi's key thing is fatwa of Sahabi when contrasted with hadith. Okay? So what's the difference between saying I don't think the fatwa of a Sahabi is a proof versus I don't think the fatwa of Sahabi is a proof when contrasted with hadith, right? There's a huge difference because we're going to come along and we're going to find a significant amount of points in fiqh, right, that are agreed upon in the form of dhahib that really have no proof. Meaning, if you want to be annoying and pedantic, you say, where is the clear proof, for example, in the Quran or hadith for this? You're not really going to find it, right? You're not really going to find it. So it's not really crystal clear. But you will find that majority of the Sahaba and Tabi'in held that position. Therefore, it was adopted by the majority of scholars, the form of dhahib. And so today, the form of dhahib say this. If you want to come along and say, well, technically speaking, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, you're not going to find it. So you can start editing and destroying the deen like that, right? And what do I mean by destroying the deen? Somebody, for example, certain Salafi movement, certain Salafis will do that, right? They'll come along and be like, no, there's no proof here, right? There's no proof there. So, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that the difference between editing a whole system that already exists as opposed to starting from scratch. Imam Shafi is not starting from scratch, and his madhhab is not doing that. So that's why what you'll find is that in theory, it seems kind of very conservative in that he's not going to have many things there. In practice, Imam Shafi is using all sorts of hadith all the time. He's using all sorts of fatwa, Sahaba Tabi'een, even if there is no ijma', right? In reality, he's looking at things through their eyes, right? So he is a product of an existing system as opposed to something new. Okay? He comes out of the pre-existing Maliki school. He comes out of the pre-existing Hanafi school. And he's not something new, right? The problem with the Salafi movement is, well, there's no hadith here, or I can't see the hadith, or I don't think it's sahih, or I don't see how this verse includes that. I don't see this, I don't see that. Okay, it's halal, halas, right? And it's very destructive. It's very destructive in that you can kind of basically come along. If you can't do analogy, then you won't appreciate analogy. So therefore, you'll say there's no analogy, right? And so it's kind of You know, it's just very easy to destroy a lot of things. Right? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Right. So, let's take an example. What is the proof? So in the Shafi school, we say that Taraweeh is 20 rak'ahs and it's 36 rak'ahs in Medina for the people in Medina. Like there is no hadith for that. And there's no consensus. And there's no place for analogy there. Right? It's like, how is that even, you know? So he says, like, nobody else can pray 36 rak'ahs apart from the people in Medina. What is that based on? You know? That's not analogy. You can't do that through analogy. You can't, there's not consensus. There's no hadith, right? All he says is basically the Salaf did this and khalas, there we go. So he's saying as long as there's no hadith against it, I'm going with it basically. Right? There's so many scenarios like that. Um, witnesses in marriage. It's not in the Quran. Hadith is arguably weak. Well, it is weak, right? Arguably weak. Okay. Analogy, there's no real analogy. Like that's very difficult to say. You have to have witnesses. Like where do you have to have, which contract in the deen do you have to have witnesses in? I don't know of any, right? So where's the analogy? Where's the consensus? No consensus. So Imam Shafi's proof is a weak hadith plus majority of Sahaba and Tabi'in said it, right? Notice if he wanted to destroy, he'd be like, there's no Sahih hadith, khalas, go ahead. He doesn't work like that. He's saying this is, it's not that there's a hadith that says you don't need it, right? So there's other scenarios where he's kind of working the other way around, right? So the precedent in Medina is that they are joining Maghrib and Isha for rain, not Dhuhr and Asr. Okay? The precedent in Kufa is that they are not joining, period. Okay? There were other kind of nebulous fatwa here and there, so there's no ijma', but that's the basic picture. So Imam Shafi comes along and says, well, let's look at the hadith. What does it say? The hadith says the Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha, right? And Imam Malik says that was in rain, and Imam Shafi says that was in rain. Notice how Imam Shafi is kind of following Imam Malik, right? So Imam Malik says, I think that was in rain, and Imam Shafi says, yeah, that was in rain. So Imam Shafi's, the way he looks at it is there's a hadith that is sahih that we all agree on that says the Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. Why are we acting on half of the hadith? So here it's the when contrast with the hadith, he says, yeah, I'm not going to follow the precedent of Medina when it goes against a hadith. I'm not going to do that, right? But he's starting. There's a basis that is already there. So when you're looking at the discussions, that's why Shaykh Waliullah Dahlawi said the first textbook in Shafi fiqh is the Muwatta of Imam Malik, because you will find so many things that will only make sense if you look at it through the eyes of the Muwatta. That you understand this is somebody who studied the Muwatta, memorized the Muwatta. He used to refer to Imam Malik as Sahibuna, meaning our person. Like he used to defend the Maliki school, right? Even in the he will say that there's like a theoretical debate. Sahibuna wa sahibukum, meaning our sheikh and your sheikh, Imam Malik versus Imam Abu Hanifa, right? So he's kind of like standing there. In the early Malikis wouldn't really have seen Imam Shafi to be that different. He's just kind of an important person, like Ibn Wahab of the early Malikis. He has a lot of his own opinions, right? So there's a lot in the Shafi'i school that is very Maliki. With the two of our schools, we can talk very easily, right? Which two codes can easy to go between, Jawad, like in coding language? It's quite easy to like,
Like for the same individual to code in both?
yeah. So like if you had to shift from one to the other and or like redo something, it's kind of easy if you went kind of these two, like one.
Okay, we can say Java and Kotlin.
Okay, right. So does one come from the other?
Yes, Kotlin is built on top of Java.
There we go. Right. So as opposed to something totally different. So as a Shafi'i picking up a Maliki fiqh book, it's much easier to read than it is to pick up Hanafi fiqh book because it's actually very, very different. Right. So Imam Shafi'i was influenced by the Hanafi school, but no way as much as the Maliki school. So Imam Shafi is a tweak of the Maliki school, right? He's a tweak of the Maliki school, right? And that's not so important in that it's Maliki. The importance that he comes from somewhere. He comes from somewhere, as opposed to coming from nowhere, right? So this is the concept of internal edit or internal renewal. He's a mujaddid, Imam Shafi he's an internal renewal, right? You come into a system, you are part of a company for 15 years, you invested in it, you want it to thrive, and you tweak things and you make another branch of that company. You are essentially that company. You are building on the company. You're not destroying the company. As opposed to somebody come along and says, I don't believe in capitalism, right? Let's be communists, right? Let's destroy the whole of the country with all the currency and everything, right? And all the politicians, get rid of all of them. That's a very destructive thing. That's like external renewal, right? External what's it called? Tajdeed, where you look at something from the outside, and you're like, yeah, to heck with all of that, right? That's what we have. The attitude of the Salafi movement is like that. It's coming from the outside, it's not coming from the inside. Um, I don't know when Dr. Dr. Jawad Qurashi from Zaytuna, he, I believe, has a book that has come out or is coming out, or an essay on the development of the step-by-step development of the Salaf movement, etc. But initially, it was not like that. Initially, there was things in the Salaf movement that were very much like make the deen easier, right? But we're still internal, right? We're still part of this tradition. And then it gets to a stage where you're not even where you're not part of the tradition at all. You're just looking at it from the outside. Very, very different. Or you want to be a part of the tradition, but you're not. Like you're not actually part of the tradition to begin with, right? So, okay. Um, so we said assumed to be literal. Okay, another issue then as well is istihsan. And we're going to see this a lot. Istihsan. So istihsan is a bit of a tricky thing, basically. So we have the rule, right, which is called the qiyas. That we don't mean by qiyas here, right? We have the rule, okay? And then we have the istihsan, which is the exception to the rule, right? So this word will be used. This will rule. This word will be used in different madhhab in different ways, right? So sometimes it can be, for example, for difficulty. So there's a rule, but it doesn't apply because of difficulty. Sometimes it doesn't apply because of the nuance of the situation. Sometimes it doesn't apply because there's a fatwa of a Sahabi. Sometimes it doesn't apply because something else. Imam Shafi was interested in doing one particular thing. He said, don't randomly use this. Don't use this in a chaotic way, right? So here's a few examples of istihsan, okay? A child cannot be a witness, right? A child cannot bear witness. So there were a bunch of kids, 6-year-olds, 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and one of there's a 6-year-old boy called Ahmed. He got out a knife from the kitchen and stabbed one of the boys. Everybody saw him, stabbed him to death. So the little kids, they all know that Ahmed killed one of the other kids. Okay? And so then, but they can't be witnesses, right? So there's nobody else, there's no adults there. And so how does this work? Right? How does it work? So the rule is, Khalas, there's no evidence. There's nothing you can do. There's like the kid died, that's sure, but you can't say that Ahmed did it because there's no evidence, there's no witnesses. So even though all the kids are saying that, you can't, that doesn't count. Right? That's the rule. Imam Malik comes along and says, no, 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 no. If in a specific scenario they all go and tell the authorities immediately without being speaking to parents or without anything else, they go and say it, right? And there was nobody else there, then this is acceptable. This is a kind of exception to the rule because how else are they supposed to happen? How is it going to work, right? So that's Imam Malik's fatwa, right? So Imam Shafi says, I understand what you're saying. Like it makes sense. If that was my kid and I saw this situation, I would personally accept it, not a problem. But you are not Allah. You can't come along and change the rules, can you? Based on what would make sense, right? You can't do that. Um, the Prophet ﷺ said that, that you cannot you you cannot go back on a gift, right? You give somebody a gift, you can't go back on it unless it's the parent giving to the child, right? Imam Ahmad, he adds to that the wife giving to the husband. Says why? Because the wife is in a weak position in respect to her husband. So, for example, she was giving him money, she was giving him things, etc. She was kind of doing it in a weak situation. So there's a kind of reason why she should be given a right to kind of like take it back. Okay, so like I understand what you're saying, but is that proven in the Quran? You know, like it makes sense, but can you kind of just break the rule there? Like the rule is nobody apart from the parent. The wife is not your parent, so like what's going on there, right? Um, there's a general rule on not selling things you don't have access to, right? It's a problem. There are exceptions to that. So, for example, like a Selim contract. Selim contract, I don't have access to 2 tons of wheat, but you can sell 2 tons of wheat that you don't have access to, right? And the person pays upfront, right? So that's fine. But what about so one side of the bargain has been delivered, the other one hasn't. What if we do both? What if we say, for example, hey, I'm gonna grow it, and as it grows, you pay me, or I'll build it, right? I'll build a house, and as I'm building the house for you, you pay me in installments. Like, is that okay? So the Hanafis say, yeah, because it's kind of like there's a need for that, right? And the Shafis and Malikis and Hanbalis say, you can't do that. It's not a contract that's established in Sharia, right? You can't do that, right? So what will happen is that is a scholar will kind of see, oh, this is kind of different, right? This is slightly different. That's kind of different. And the issue is, what do you mean kind of different? So Imam Shafi, in reality, will do istihsan, right? So for example, in uh, in which one was it? It's I think it's oh, in Shufa, right? Imam Shafi actually uses the word astahsin. So Shufa, right, is Jawad is selling his selling a part of his house that is separated from his, but not quite separated yet. Um, I'm living next door to him. He's selling to somebody else. I want to get it instead of the other person. That's called shufa. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, does not mention that you have 3 days to veto Jawad's sale and exercise your right to object and buy it instead. Okay. So Imam Shafi'i says astahsin, right? I think it would be a good idea if it's three. Like literally, he made that up. Like he's saying you should have about 3 days to work it out. The relied upon position in the school is no, it's immediate. Like you heard about it, you heard that Jawad's selling it last night. Okay, tomorrow morning you got to make the phone call, right? Normal working hours. That's what you have, right? If you were in the West, then it's Friday night. Okay, you have till Monday morning, but you have the normal working hours to do things, right? That's how they look at it, right? He said so. He said once, "Oh, I think 3 days would be a good idea," right? He actually made that up, right? She made it up, right? So people do istihsan all the time. All fuqaha do istihsan, right? Um, but that's what he said, and literally he used the word istihsan. So his objection was to exactly what he was doing, which was like, where'd you get that from? Like, how can you come along and think for Allah, right? Like, what are you doing? You can't do that. So he's just fundamentally against that. All you can do is do analogy, right? Say this is like this, right? Which is very, very similar, right? Like this scenario is like that scenario. So if you look, for example, the rules of in tayammum, what's going to happen is we're going to have all these kind of distances and this, that. It's all made up, right? It's all made up based on the general idea of difficulty, right? So they're doing istihsan, they're kind of making things up, right? But they're doing it in the light of, well, this will be difficult, that's difficult, etc. This kind of distance, etc. Right? But his issue was don't do it in a crazy way, right? Another two examples are in contracts, or three examples actually. One in khufs, right? So khufs, they have to cover your feet, right? Um, it's feet because they're on your feet. There's a lot of pressure on the feet. Your hoofs might get a hole, right? Your socks get holes, hoofs get holes. So his original position is, yeah, if you have a little hole in it, it's fine. So technically speaking, technically speaking, the qiyas is if your foot is not covered 100% by these hoofs, you can't wipe on them. The istihsan is, yeah, but that would be difficult, right? Because you have shoes on, and shoes often get holes and stuff. Socks on, they get holes. And he says, well, where do we get that from? So his original position was, yeah, it's excused. And his final position is, no, it's not excused, right? It's like, that's where that exception come from, right? Like, it's not that difficult. Um, another example is, in two examples in trade, right? So is what's called Sharikat al-Abdan, right? Sharikat al-Abdan is normal Sharika is Jawad and I, we both put $50,000 into a company. We have $100,000 and we start building this fiqh Q&A app. Okay? So we both invested money. We both have 50% assets, 50% ownership of every single thing. And um, whatever we sell or make, we own 50% of it, and profits come in 50%. That we dissolve the company, get 50%. Easy, right? So now I come along and say, hey, Jawad, I don't have any money, you don't have any money. Let's just work together, okay? We'll just work together and split the profits, right? That's called Sharikat al-Abdan. You are not investing money. You're not hiring somebody. It's just two people working together and they will split the profits in a certain ratio. Okay? So in the Shafi'i school, it's not halal, right? In the other schools, it's halal. Why? Because there's no precedent for it in the Quran and Sunnah, A. And B, it's pretty vague, right? Jawad is working 20 hours a day. I'm sitting there responding here and there. So it looks like I'm there available, but I actually do like 2 hours a day, right? So he's not paying me to work. He's not paying me for a job. I'm not paying him for a job. I'm not paying, he's not paying me per hour. I'm not paying him per hour. There's a lot of things. I just not, I put in X, he put in X. It's kind of vague, and it will if you go into that business, you'll have problems, right? Like you feel like, dude, why am I doing all the work here? Or Joad didn't do what I thought him to do. Right? He was going to do the marketing. It's like, bro, you sent like one thing, like you didn't do marketing. Marketing is, and he's like, Fareed, like you didn't do the content. So I did do the content. Yeah, we didn't check the content. Well, I created it. You check it, right? He's like, dude, you're the content guy. You're gonna have problems. So anyway, there's issues that come up there. So the Jumhur, they say there is a market demand for that. People don't have cash. They can't go and hire people. So they do this all the time. Like, I'll make the cakes, you do delivery. He does the marketing, he does the outsourcing, whatever it is, right? We team up and we split the profits in that way. That's how we do things. Okay. So the majority of scholars, they say it's halal istihsanan. There's no dalil for it, but it's a thing that's needed. Yes, it's vague. Yes, it has problems, but it's okay. Managed. It's all right. It's overlooked. Imam Shafi says, no, it's not. Can't do that. Because the qiyas is no, right? So what he's doing is he's saying you're overstepping your grounds, right, in doing that. Another example is the opposite is bay'ul aina. Bay'ul aina is I sell you the pen that is in my hand right now, or pencil. I sell it to you for $1 million in cash. So here we go, Jawad. And I hand it to Jawad. Jawad takes it and he gives me $1 million in cash. Then he sells it back to me for $1.1 million in credit. So now I have $1 million in cash and I owe him $1.1 million in credit to be paid in 6 months. So what's that called? That's called taking Allah for a ride, right? That's like mocking the religion. Basically, what you did is you used a pencil to structure riba. That's what you did, right? So a normal person would say, that's pretty funny, right? How would that, how would that be halal, right? And so the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis say this is haram, this is called riba, right? This is called riba. Imam Shafi says, come on, guys, haven't we already agreed that contracts are based on what you say, right? Like if you say a divorce, it counts as a divorce even if you don't mean it, right? If you say a marriage without intention, or you had an intention of divorcing her the next day, it doesn't matter. What we're talking about is a contract. So what did you say? He said, I hereby sell you this pen, khalas. Was there a transfer of ownership? Yeah. Did it say on the condition that you sell it back to me? No, right? And so if I want to be clever, right, I can trick Jawad. I say, hey Jawad, let's do this trick, right? We can't do riba, but we can do this. So then he sells me that he buys the pen for me for $1 million, and I walk off. He's like, yeah, but what about the other one? That wasn't in the contract, right? So now he bought the pen for me for $1 million, and that's it. I'm not contractually obliged to sell it back to him for 1.1 million. So Imam Shafi says, listen, guys, that's how contracts work. You're like looking at them as a kind of like you look at them in as like in terms of their maqsad, their goals, right? That's not your job. Your job is to look at it as a contract. The contract works like this. Somebody said this, somebody said that. End of story. So I said this, it became Jawad's. He sold it back to me in credit. Khalas. Like the one who made the first contract halal and made the second contract halal, are you trying to say he made the two contracts haram? And say, yeah, I'm saying that because look at the goal. Say, your job is not the goal. Your job is you can't come along and do things like that. You can't come along and look at a contract or something and say, oh, but it's for bad reasons. That's not your role, right? And notice the very opposite of this. The very opposite of this is Imam Ahmad say that contract is haram. And in fact, a contract such as a temporary marriage that you intended to be temporary, but you didn't say it in the contract, is also invalid, right? It's like totally opposite, right? So for Imam Shafi says, no, this is the rule, this is the thing. You can't come along and break rules. So the contract is halal, that's it. That's a way of doing it's a hila, right? So what you'll find then is when it comes to sad al-dhara'i, blocking the means to haram, the Shafi school will do it way less than any other schools because blocking the means is a way of changing the rules in order to achieve the goals of the Sharia. Okay, my apologies. Right. So again, so Imam Shafi then is what's he's going to do? He's going to come and look at the other madhhab. He's going to say, "Oh, hang on a minute. Your fatwa and your madhhab is based on Sahabi versus Sahih Hadith. Not accepting. Not happy. Your fatwa is based on istihsan. Not going to accept it. Your fatwa is based on a mursal hadith. Not going to accept it. Your fatwa is based on something to be assumed to be metaphorical when it's not. Right? Who knows an example of that? Something assumed to be metaphorical, but it's not. أولى مستم النساء. So, in the so if you look at أولى مستم النساء, the issue of all touching women, Imam al-Shafi'i is like basically the most literal of all of them, and the most impractical, intentionally. So Ibn Abbas comes along and he says, "Listen, guys, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala does not use disgusting words in the Quran." Okay, so Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is saying that if you go to the bathroom or you quote unquote touch women, i.e., you need to make wudu, you need to make ghusl, and you don't have any water, go make tayammum. Okay? So Imam Shafi in the end of the he has these debates with people who are passed away well before him. So one of these debates is with Ibn Abbas. So he says basically, Ibn Abbas, you've assumed la mastum, which is to touch. You've assumed that it means intercourse. Does it literally mean intercourse? No. Okay, do we have a proof that it doesn't literally mean intercourse? So Imam Shafi says there's a hadith. I don't know if it's sahih or not, which is that the Prophet ﷺ kissed one of his wives and went to the masjid to pray. I don't know if it's sahih or not. I can't work it out. If it's sahih, fine. I'll abandon the literal meaning of the verse and go to the metaphorical meaning. And he left it like that. The Shafi'is, they looked at the hadith, they said, hadith weak, right? And, that's it. So basically, we're going to go with it as it is, right? So notice, so his objection was assuming something to be metaphorical when it should be assumed to be literal. Everything should be assumed to be literal until proven otherwise, right? Everything should be assumed to be all inclusive until proven otherwise, right? Um, and so he objected to that. So he said, "Oh, right." And then you might come along and say, "Well, Imam Shafi, isn't it a bit awkward, right? Like, you live in a small house and you have a wife there, and you might touch her, break the wudu, right? Kind of difficult." So he says, "What's the rule?" The rule says, "Or if you touch your wife, okay, why is there an exception to the rule then?" You know what I'm saying? So it's not far-fetched. It's not far-fetched that the process of the Malikis, right? The process of the Malikis and Hanbalis is like this. We hold the hadith to be the ayah to be literal. Okay, we hold the ayah to be literal, means touching. But it would be really awkward, if it just bumped into your wife and broke your wudu. So, it doesn't mean that, right? So they basically they qualified it based on it's kind of awkward, right? You know? And so we actually do that in life, right? Like if you became the manager of your company, you would kind of like start to make decisions, right? You kind of make exceptions to rules. The judge kind of makes exception to the rule. Technically speaking, this person shouldn't be allowed in the country, but we let them in. Technically speaking, this person should be allowed citizenship, but we should not going to give it to them. Technically speaking, like we do a lot of exceptions because we're humans, right? But he's saying you can't do that, right? And in fact, we have a position in the school that says women means women, khalas. So touch any woman, including your sister, your wife, yes, including your sister, including your mother and your daughter, right? خلاص, if she's a woman, you've touched a woman, end of story. So what we will find, this whole issue of not following istihsan, this results that in the Shafi fiqh, in mu'amalat, generally speaking, mu'amalat, the Shafi school is the strictest and less flexible, intentionally so, right? It's intentionally so, right? Whereas the other schools, there's a bit more flexible because basically they're kind of doing their own thing, if that makes sense, right? They're kind of doing their own thing. Um, so the Shafi school is a bit safer in that, right? Now the Shafi school does do that. We will do that all the time, right? We will do that all the time. Say, yeah, but this rule applies here, but not here. Well, here, but not here. They do that all the time. Istihsan is happening all the time in Shafi school. We will do things like, oh, this is haram because it leads to this. It's like it doesn't really lead to that, right? But we will do things like, so istihsan or what we call istislah and sadd al blocking the means to the haram, like forbidding something that's principle halal. We do it in the Shafi school. It's just in principle we don't do it. If that makes sense. Like we don't intentionally do it. We do it by accident because we're humans, and kind of humans function like that, right? But we're not trying to do it. Does that make sense? Um,
Yes.
and so the Shafis then will, whenever we do it, we'll always explain it as analogy, through analogy, right? When it's not the case, right? Now, Dawood al-Zahiri looks what Imam Shafi is doing, right? And he says everything you're doing, this whole thing about doing blocking istihsan, makes a lot of sense, right? But this whole thing about not doing istihsan, in reality, also tells us we shouldn't do qiyas to begin with. Because qiyas and istihsan are kind of similar. Istihsan is, hang on a minute, I know how Allah works, I know what He's trying to achieve. Let me just turn off autopilot for a bit and drive by myself for a bit. Okay? That's what you're doing. You're kind of making exceptions to rules and bending this and bending that based on what you kind of think Allah would probably want you to do. That whole thing is assuming that you kind of know what Allah wants you to do, right? And that is the premise for qiyas. Qiyas is Allah told me to do X. He's probably telling me to do X because of Y. Y is also found in Z. Okay, I'm going to do Z is the same as X, right? So what Imam Shafi's criticism of istihsan is a partial criticism of qiyas as well, right? And qiyas obviously is problematic, right? Your analogy is totally off. right? You're looking at something, the Prophet ﷺ said something, the reason for it is totally off. Like the way that you're thinking could be totally off. And so you do an analogy and it's just not even sound at all, right? So, the Shafis, we do analogy from a dog to a pig, right? When the analogy should be a dog, and we say that a wolf is excluded because it's not a dog. But then we do analogy from, but maybe the analogy should be from a wolf, a dog, to a wolf and any other predatory animal, right? So you included a pig, which doesn't really eat meat. I mean, it's not. I guess it's an omnivore, but it doesn't really eat meat. And then suddenly you included the pig but excluded the wolf, when maybe the hadith is including the wolf and excluding the pig. I don't know. So like analogy is kind of it's a bit flimsy. It's a little bit flimsy and it's a bit tricky, right? Just like istihsan, like, oh, you looked at it in a different way. And it's like, you looked at it in the wrong way, Habibi. Like the very place where Allah wants you to apply the rule, you didn't apply, right? Jawad and I went into business. He can't study with me anymore. Why? Because while he was studying with me, we went into business, we did something. He felt I cut him short. I felt he cut me short. And we're like, yeah, whatever, just forget it. Why? Because we did Sharikat al-Abdan. And Imam Shafi said it was haram. And now we're both feeling that we didn't, because of the gharar, because of the lack of clarity, which Allah had already forbidden on the tongue of His Prophet ﷺ, we went into contract and now we didn't do it, right? So it's a bit problematic, right? It's a bit problematic, right? Um, and so it has a point, but then you get Dawood al-Zahiri. Now you get the Zahiri madhhab, right? And the Zahiri madhhab it feeds into the modern Salafi madhhab accidentally. Like Salafi is not intentionally Zahiri, but they are accidentally Zahiri, right? They kind of do things like that. So anyway, so that's where we are basically. So the key thing then is this. Imam Shafi'i, if you read, like, here's Kitab al to my right here. It's like 9 volumes. I've lost the ninth volume, unfortunately. I lost it a long time ago, but now forgive me. Anyway, it was this the volume that had all the debates in it, so I was taking it to here, taking it to there, and I somehow lost it. Anyway, so in 9 volumes, the masail that he's talking about, right? Many Orientalists are like this, and there's no way that Imam Shafi wrote that book, right? There is no way that Imam Shafi wrote that book because it's way too advanced. And in fact, Imam Shafi debates with himself. So why on earth would he be debating with himself? He'd say, this has been said and this has been said. Like, that makes no sense. So certain Orientalists, they came along, they said, the Kitab al by Imam Shafi is not by Imam Shafi. There's no way that this person who died in 204 wrote this book. Fiqh developed way slower than that. It was probably written in the 4th century, 5th century, something like that, right? Along comes Dr. Ahmad Shamsi, and he says, well, that's just interesting because nobody's ever said that before. And he says, no, the contents of the are from Imam Shafi. And he compares very carefully the Mukhtasar al-Muzani, which we know is a textbook in the Shafi school, which we know was written at that time. And he compares the language and compares this and says, look, Mukhtasar al-Muzani is a summary of this. It's the same thing. It was written at that time, right? And so what is lost on those Orientalists or on certain Orientalists is that Imam Shafi didn't sit there and think, oh, I read the verse of the Quran and he just like starts doing all of this processing by himself. He's not doing that. There is generations of fiqh happening before. The mas'ala that he's talking about, this very particular mas'ala, there's a whole precedent before it. Just like today, when I think about something in fiqh, I already have a structure in my head. I'm already thinking as a Shafi'i because I already have all this precedent in my head. So Imam Shafi'i is not just he's amazing, but he's not the first person who ever had this discussion, right? He's not answering this question for the first time. Answering this question in light of what he's already studied before, right? And sometimes it's copy and paste, right? So copy paste edit, copy paste edit, copy paste edit. That's what he's doing, right? It's not that he's the first person to ever have thought about this ever. Okay, so that's basically that's where we are with the Shafi school. Okay, makes sense, inshallah.
Yes.
Any questions so far?
I don't believe so.
Okay, okay. So now, let's go on here. To move canvas, hold mouse. What type again? Why can I type? Oh, there we go. So now, so we have Imam Shafi. This is from, he's from 150 to 204. So what happens basically at the end of his life is we have what's called the old school. So the old school is Imam Shafi is a mature mujtahid. He has his own opinions. He's doing his own process, and he has a set of fatwa, etc., and a set of students in Baghdad. So he's in Baghdad. Okay. He has students like Imam Ahmad, uh, al-Karabisi, Abu Thawr, al-Karabisi, and others. Okay. So he has basically his system is there, and he's writing books, answering fatwa, explaining things, debating. Okay. Then he moves to Egypt. Okay. And he basically, which is just he it's like a second draft, right? Second draft of the school. Okay. So the second draft does not change every single thing, but there are certain differences. Okay, there are certain differences. So you get the what's called the al-Qadim, the old school, and al-Jadid, the new school, right? And you notice sometimes that it's kind of like the difference is that he's kind of like when people use AI to translate, and they'll do it again. Like you get language, you did it once, and then you did it again. Like you got the result, and you said, "Can you make this sound like more like this? Make it sound like this?" Right? It's kind of like that. It's like if you like reapplying the settings, right? So if you can imagine draft one, and then draft two is like reapplying it. So you will often find that, for example, things in the old school might have more istihsan in it, right? Or more things that qala sahabi, right? So you'll find things like, oh, the old school agreed with the fatwa of a Sahabi. The new school doesn't, because he's saying, well, technically speaking, there is a conflict between what the Sahabi is saying and the Hadith, if you look at it from this point of view, right? Or his old school is istihsan. He's saying, well, it's not really valid, is it? Right? Where's the system? Show me the actual real reason why we're making this exception to the rule. There's no real reason, right? So you'll sometimes, you don't always find it, but you'll sometimes find that the old school is more like there'll be certain things that would agree with the Hanafi school, certain things that will agree, like Bay al-Fuduli that we'll see. Bay al-Fuduli is Jawad was staying at my house, and while I was gone, somebody said, "Hey, can I buy that book? Offer you for $1 million." They're like, "Yeah, sure." I mean, I don't know what Sheikh Farid wants or doesn't want, but I'm sure he would be happy to sell this book for $1 million, right? So you sold my book without my permission, which you don't own, and I have not made you a responsible for it. You sold it to this guy for $1 million. I come back and say, "Oh, good job, mashallah, $1 million, sorted," right? That's great. So in principle, it's an invalid contract. So the old school is that the sihha of the contract is mawquf, it's suspended. If I'm okay with it, goes ahead. If it's not, I can go and cancel the contract. The Jadid is not a contract to begin with. Like the guy doesn't own the book, I don't have the money. I have to go back and give him the money, he has to give the book back. It's not a contract, right? So there's more flexibility in the old school than the new school on that issue, based on certain fatwa of certain Sahaba. And he's saying, well, no, the Prophet said, La tabi' ma laysa indak. Don't sell what you don't have. Khalas. Right? You can't sell something that's not yours. Therefore, you can't sell something that's not yours. Why is there an exception to the rule? How can we create this flexibility that doesn't already exist? Right? Is that making sense?
Yes. So I guess like in a modern sense for us, as learners of the Shafi'i madhhab, is that old school still taken into account, or is everything based off of the
Yeah,
new
it is.
school?
It is. It does exist. You could still follow it in principle. There's a debate, can you follow it in principle or not? But it certainly exists. And so in reality, the old school is, you know, when we're studying fiqh, there's two things that we're doing. One is I need to give an answer right now to a fiqh question. I need to give a fatwa. I have a court ruling. I want to follow this thing. It's a practical system. The other thing that we're doing is learning, right? We're learning fiqh, right? So what you will find is Like, why am I debating a position that's not a relied upon position? The answer is because they're trying to become a faqih. So we will debate all sorts of things, right? So in the minhaj, you'll see, well, there's two positions. Okay, why are you telling me two positions? In the tanbih, two positions. Why are you telling me two positions? Just tell me the relied upon position. Because I want you to think about them, right? The Hanafi, the graduate Hanafi studying the Hidayah, right? What's he going to do? The Hidayah. Shafi says this. The Imam says this. Sahibain say this. Like, why are you telling me four positions? Because I want you to think, right? So, uh, so, so in terms of the first level, the Qadim can be useful not as a fatwa and not as a court ruling, right? But it could be useful في حق الخاص, right? So I personally, I want to follow this position. Okay, if you want to follow that position, it's a valid opinion, to be fair, right? I can't give the fatwa of it. I can't give a court ruling as a Shafi judge, but I can. You want to do that? It's what's called irshad. Just tell somebody, hey, go ahead, follow the qadim. That's fine. It's a position at the end of the day, right? That's for the at a practical level. On the scholarly level, it's like it's a debate. Why, right? And so, if you look at the wajiz, the wajiz of Imam Ghazali, same kind of thing. They mentioned this position, that position, and they mentioned Maliki school. They mentioned the Muzani's objection, the Hanafi objection, the Maliki objection. Like, why are you doing that? Because I'm trying to make you a faqih, right? So on a lower level, it's not a very good thing to do at all, right? That's why, pedagogically you don't do that. But when we're looking at the Lubab by al-Hamili, he'll be like, yeah, the old school is this, and there's two positions in this. You're like, okay, well, which one is the right position? He's not mentioning it because he wants you to think about it, right? So I remember asking Sheikh Abdul Karim Yahya, right? I said, how when in Tarim and they teach the Tanbih of Shirazi, that's like a pre-Nawawi school, and it was to say وَفِيهِ قَوْلَانِ. It's like, here's an issue, two positions. And I'm like, how would they do that? He would say, he call it Sa'atul Ilm, right? It's the breadth of knowledge. Like it's important to know different opinions, right? There's quite significant things. And so when you look at the Qadim and you look at the different positions in the school, the Shafi school is, as we'll discuss, is more of a debate than it is an answer. If that makes sense. So that's real fiqh, is the debate and the ability to play with these problems, as opposed to here's an answer, memorize the answer. That is a level of fiqh, right? Here is an answer, memorize the answer, and apply it with these criterion. That is a level of fiqh, right? That's difficult. But another level is, this is the reason for this, and this is the reason for this. Like, oh yeah, good point. How do I weigh that up, right? So Imam Bajuri, he says there's like three levels of learning anything, right? Level number one is you don't have a picture of what this science is. Like, I don't know what Nahu is. I know it begins with the word N, but that's Nahu. And I know it's difficult. I know it's something to do with word endings, but I don't know what you talk about in Nahu, right? So that stage one is I'm giving you the tasawwur am. I'm trying to say, what is a fi'al, what is a fa'il, what's maf'ul bihi, what's this, what's that, what's i'rab, da 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 da. Okay. Level two then is I have a tasawwur of the masail, but they're not very complex. So now I'm going to get from simple to complex, right? Could you have a sentence that is only composed of a mubtada and a fa'il? Like, how could you have a mubtada and a fa'il in the same sentence? Isn't one in like a noun sentence, the other in a verb sentence? Like, what's going on? So you go through complex scenarios, right? Complex things. So we're now going into this book, for example, in تحرير تنقيح al-Lubab, the مسائل are دقيقة, it's hard, right? So like the tasawwur of the mas'ala is tricky, right? When you transfer one type of zakatable wealth to another one, when does the howl stop and when does it start again? It's complex, right? Complex scenarios, a lot of complex things, right? Fath al-Mu'in, complex scenarios, right? And then the second level is so the third level is I have complex scenarios in my head, but now I need to get involved in doing the hujjah. Why this? Why that? Right? So in any science, you have to go through these three stages. Right? Why this? Why that? So basically the first two stages are the grammar stages, right? If you're familiar with the trivium, right? The grammar stages, which is like just like get me to understand the complex discussion, right? I can do simple division. Now I want to do long division. Okay, now I want to do long division. Now I want to do quadratic equations. Quadratic, right? I want to do something complex now. I want quadratic equations. Now I want to do differentiation. Oh, right. And then you've got to take me to the stage of the rhetoric stage, which is, can you like debate this? Right? Can you see that from this point of view, from that point of view? Right? And so it's hard. The second level is hard because it's complex. And the third level is very hard because it's basically impossible. But you need something of these things, right? You need something of these things. So we're not going to be really doing that, right? But at least that's what they kind of that's how it was all done in the past. Okay. So anyway, so the new school, that's the new school. Does that make sense, Jawad? Did I answer your question?
Yes. Barakallahu feek.
So what's really interesting, for example, is seeing the Qadim agreed with the Zahir of a hadith, the Jadid doesn't. So it's not like this. It's not like he didn't know a hadith in the Qadim, and then he did know a hadith in the Jadid, so he agreed with it. It's actually the opposite, right? So it's really interesting, right? Here's the hadith, and then he went against it in the Jadid. So that means what's going on there, right? That means obviously he's looking at the hadith in another way. And it's very interesting when a scholar goes against obvious evidence, right? Sherlock Holmes says the guy who hated the murder victim and had the knife in his hand and confessed to it was not actually the murderer. Like, how? The guy hated him. He was at the scene of the crime with the knife, with blood on his hands, and he confessed to murdering. How is he not the murderer? Right? And it's like, obviously, Sherlock, you must be, Holmes, sorry, you must have some kind of really deep insight. That would be really interesting to find out what you're thinking. So Imam Shafi in the Jadid goes against the Sahih Hadith. What's going on there? Right? That's a very interesting thing. Okay, so anyway, so now we have the Jadid. So now we have the Jadid, and then we have his students in Egypt. So we have al-Buwaiti, we have al-Muzani, we have his scribe Rabi', among others. Harmala, and others. Okay, so now so then Imam Shafi passes away, leaving behind him students from the old school, students from the new school, and certain books, right? There's certain books. Key books that he leaves is right, which he dictated, the Kitab and Risala, which is on Usul. So Usul is his theory, is his Usul al-Fiqh, and the is a key book there. Okay. Um, then we have all of these teachers, right? So his old teachers will be quoting his fatwa in the old opinion, and his new ones will be disseminating his knowledge in the new one. So the new ones, they all write their own textbooks about. So these are textbooks. These are really important. So textbooks written by al-Buwaiti. So that's extant. We have that, right? Al-Buwaiti, Mukhtasar al-Buwaiti, that exists. We have Mukhtasar al-Muzani, of course. That was the textbook, right? We have Mukhtasar Rabi' that doesn't exist. Mukhtasar Harmala as well doesn't exist. And I think there's others as well, right? So so now what's going to happen is these people are going to start teaching. So Imam Muzani is going to start teaching people like his nephew, Imam Tahawi. Imam Buwaitu will start teaching people like Ad-Darimi, right? The author of Sunan Ad-Darimi, etc. People will be studying with Rabi', like Imam Tirmidhi studied with Rabi', right? And others. So what's going to happen is they're going to start teaching, okay? But you can see there's a number of things happening. Number one, people will be teaching the old opinion and the new opinion, okay? And they'll also be agreeing or disagreeing. So in the Mukhtasar Muzani, Imam Muzani will disagree, right? So there's spreading of the old school, spreading of the new school, and your own opinion of it, right? So you're studying with Imam Muzani. Imam Muzani is saying, "Oh, Imam Shafi said this, he said this, but I disagree for this reason, etc., etc." Right? So it's kind of spreading out like that. Okay, so that's basically where we are now in the beginning of the 3rd century. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next stage. Right. So inshallah, everyone's aware this is a 2-hour class, right? So if you need to leave, let me know. That's fine. But um, it's by default. Okay. So now we have the basically third to fifth century approximately stage, 8 centuries, Hijri. Okay. This is now the stage of expansion. Okay. So it's expansion and critique. Okay. So expansion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I have Kitab al-Umm. Okay. I understand how Imam Shafi works. I'm going to teach the madhhab and I'm going to expand. I'm going to do analogy. Right. So I'm doing analogy from Imam Shafi's analogy. So Imam Shafi spoke about this. I'm going to speak about this. Right. So for example, so we have like key books that are kind of like really doing that to begin with, right? So something like the Muwalladat, right? Muwalladat means the new issues by Ibn Haddad. So he's a student of Imam al-Nasa'i in Egypt, Imam Ibn al-Haddad, and his book the Masail al-Muwalladat, which he says Imam Shafi said this, so therefore I'm saying this. Imam Shafi said this, I'm saying this, right? Ibn al-Qas, also very early from Iran, I believe. I think he's in Baghdad, I'm not sure. But I think he's from Tabaristan originally, I'm not sure. So he will, he's somebody, he will say, the Hanafis say that Imam Shafi said this, and the Hanafis say this, and Imam Shafi'i's principle would actually agree with them, right? So he'll use this word takhrij, قلت كذا تخريجا, right? Meaning I'm expanding these things, right? So then this is not just expansion, but like mass expansion, right? So you see in these 2 centuries, like tons and tons of work happening, most of which just has not reached us. So I'm looking to my right now. Okay, I'm looking to my right, and I have Kitab al-Umm, and I have Mukhtasar al-Buwaiti, Mukhtasar al-Muzani, um, and then I have like the first kind of, I mean, I have like one volume, the Talkhis of Ibn al-Qas, where he uses this thing. This is one volume. Um, I have the Muwalladat, which is like a very small volume, right, of Ibn Haddad. But in reality, in that period, there's tons and tons and tons and tons of things happening. So what's happening is basically scholars are coming along, they are looking at Imam Shafi'i, and they're saying, okay, what's next? You said this, what's next? And they're just expanding. Huge analogy. And then on kind of different levels, right? So when we say analogy, there is like, imagine, for example, like AI. I say, for example, look, AI, look at how I'm writing this poem and finish it for me. Okay. So so AI is doing analogy, right? It's going to say, well, given you did this, you did this, I'm going to assume you do this, right? It doesn't really do assumption, but it's kind of like, yeah, that's what it's going to do. But if I ask AI, um, given, look at my week, okay, and predict the next 20 years of my life. So there's a big difference in predict what I'm going to put in my next stanza of my poem. Okay, so he's looking at the rhythm, looking at the vocabulary, right? If I gave AI some of my other things that are written, it'd be a bit easier, right? A bit more accurate. But here now, I want, I want, I want AI to figure out what I'm going to do in the next 20 years of my life. So, or look at the first 20 years of my life, or the first 40 years of my life. Look what I've done, and now make an estimation of the next 40 years of my life. That's a huge kind of analogy, right? Like it's not going to be very good, right? And in order to do it meaningfully, AI is going to have to say, well, can you give me a lot more information, please? Like, I need to see like a lot more about your personality, right? 'Cause otherwise, it's not going to mean much. And it would just be kind of lame, right? So there's different types of analogy, right? There's different types of analogy. There's analogy where you do something and it's kind of, um, where it's very simple, right? It's very simple. So, Imam Shafi'i said that the pig is like the dog. And Imam Shafi'i says you can't use soap when washing dog filth. So given that you've already told me that pig filth is like dog filth, I'm presuming you're going to tell me that I can't use soap in dog soap when I'm cleaning pig filth, right? Isn't that kind of obvious? So it's a very low level assumption that anybody like you and I could do, right? And practically, you and I will do that on a regular basis. Like when we're studying fiqh, they're like, yeah, it's the same thing, right? Like that's basically exactly the same thing. There's not a complex jump at all. But when analogy becomes much bigger, for example, I'm looking at how Imam Shafi'i spoke about this. So now I'm going to build Imam Shafi'i's law of marine transport, right? That's a section in law, right? Marine, marine transport and marine commerce. There's a whole thing in law, like a whole specialization, right? So I'm going to get everything he said here, all the exceptions that he made, and recreate it with a totally different situation and come up with new scenarios and new conditions based on the specifics of buying and selling and delivering and deliverability and liability at sea. You know what I'm saying? Like that's really hard. So what you'll have then is what's called ashab al-wujuh. They're not just doing analogy, they're doing huge analogy. The expansion is like you would have to basically be another Shafi to do this, right? And that's exactly what they are. This is very important. So this expansion process, it happens now. There are now hundreds of mini Shafi'is. Okay? They are not muqallideen. They're not doing taqlid, they're doing ijtihad. And we call them ashab al-wujuh. This is super important, right? Ashab al-wujuh. So you say basically what happened is the ummah was thinking for the first few hundred years and then they stopped thinking, right? Basically, look how Ibn Qutaybah has this opinion, Ibn Khalaway has this opinion, or Ibn Rahaway has this opinion, Bukhari has this opinion, and then suddenly in the third, fourth, fifth century, everyone's just like Shafi'i or just Hanafi. That's not true. These people are ashab al-wujuh. These people are mujtahid imams thinking in that system, doing huge thought. They are and again listen to my I have a four class on the introduction on Zaytech, Zay tech, that have a thing about the history of the four madhhab. You can see that, and I'm quoting the Shafi'is and quoting other sources, how that these early people in the madhhab, they didn't just blindly follow the Imam. So they're not blindly following Imam Shafi. They're not doing that. They are working with him, and the system is bigger than him. They understand the system, they understand what he's saying, they have all these precedent from before, but they're not taking it as divine writ. It's not revelation what he's saying. So they are tweaking, they're expanding, they're doing so they are hundreds, literally hundreds of mini Shafi'is, and these are called Ashab al-Wujuh, doing this thing. They're rebuilding totally a whole new discussions, right? Tweaking what he said, editing what he said, expanding it a lot. Okay. And there's also critique, right? So there's somebody who's going to expand, and there's somebody who is going to critique, like Ibn Mundhir or like the four Muhammads, right? So this is Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. This is Muhammad Abu Bakr ibn Khuzaymah. This is Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi. This is Muhammad ibn Mundhir, right? These four Muhammads, these are mujtahid imams, but they are 100% working within the Shafi framework, right? Usulan and qawa'idan, not furu'an, right? What does that mean? That usul, they said Imam Shafi is your critique of the world, of fiqh world is correct. Your approach is right. So we are on your approach 100%. We've studied Shafi fiqh, so we work like Shafis. The way we look at contracts, the way we look at act of worship, the way we do this is all the same, right? The structure is all the same, right? But it just comes to how you did it. So this Jawad, this is like somebody like so. What do you which language do you usually use, Jawad?
Let's say Kotlin.
Kotlin is called
Yeah.
Kotlin, right? So could you write so this company is asking you to change a certain function, okay, in the app or in the whatever thing. Could you do that in more than one way?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I just do it in a different way, but I'm still using the whole idea of programming, the whole and the same language, right? That's the four Muhammads. As opposed to Imam al-Tahawi, student of Imam Muzani, right? He comes along. And he's like, okay, 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 yeah, this is all wrong. Like we should not be, Kotlin is just stupid. Like this is so dumb on so many levels. We should be using something else. Or even more than that, I fundamentally disagree with the concept of programming, right? If you imagine somebody like the whole thing is off. We shouldn't be using computers, right? So now you're on a totally different madhhab, right? So the four Muhammads, they don't agree. They have a different conclusion to certain issues. But they are still essentially Shafi'is because in terms of their training, they are trained, right? In the Shafi school, they're coming out of the Shafi school in their qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, it's the same qawa'id, same kind of way of looking at fiqh, same kind of systems, right? In terms of the usul, 100%, right? And then in their furu' they're different. So this now, a key concept I want to repeat. So this was very important. These people were mujtahid imams. They were not muqallideen. Very important. Number one. Number two, we said with Imam Shafi, did Imam Shafi come along and just pick up Sahih Bukhari and read the Quran and come up with his own conclusions? No, Habibi. He was a product of a pre-existing discussion, right? So so he came out of something. These four Muhammads, they didn't come along and say, well, Imam Shafi, nahum rijal wa nahnu rijal. Imam Shafi doesn't know everything. Let's just do ijtihad. They are Shafi'is. They are graduate Shafis and they have different opinions. So there's a huge difference between being a graduate of a huge system versus somebody who is an upstart, right? Are you a graduate of the Shafi school? Yes. Okay, now you can start questioning the Shafi school. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, but the hadith says this. I just found on ChatGPT. It's like, Habibi, you're not a graduate of the system. Be quiet. Imam Shafi, he didn't just come along and say, Sahih hadith. All right, I found this hadith in Abu Dawood. I'm going to go get some Maliki school. He was a graduate of the Maliki school, a graduate of the Hanafi school, a graduate of these pre-existing systems, and he built on those systems. Can you see the difference? So somebody who's like, yeah, look, I think this is rajih, this. It's like, are you a graduate of any school, right? And are you working within any school? So again, a modern Salafi, what they will say is, yeah, I'm nebulously Shafi'i, Hanbali, that kind of thing. I'll look at the different opinions if I want to, and I just follow the dalil. So when you are following the dalil, what is your system for following the dalil? Let's say my system for following the dalil is dalil. You know what I'm saying? So it's like Jawad is saying, somebody comes along and says, there's this new guy who's looking at Jawad's company, like, dude, this guy, whoever you hired is fool. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. Okay. So then he says, okay, well, meet with him, right? Jawad's manager will say, fine, like you have criticism. Let's meet with Jawad and see, your criticisms. So you're saying, what language would you suggest? Say, listen, the functionality is off, bro. Like it's like all crazy. So Jawad says, which language are you going to use then? He doesn't answer. So Jawad's like looking at his manager, like, you brought the biggest fall in ever. Like this person's just criticizing me. He doesn't know a single language and he has no system whatsoever. He doesn't have 15 years in the field. What are you talking about? This guy is just an upstart. He just came in here, wants to get some money, and he's just criticizing. That's it. He doesn't have a system. So when Ibn Jarir disagrees with the Shafi school, he is dyed and imbued in the Shafi school, and he's coming from the inside and he's tweaking from the inside. It makes sense, right? And it's a useful contribution, a useful objection, okay? And he has a set research method or a set system that he's using, right? Whereas a Salafi says, Salaf, what is Salaf? That's not a system. So you have to critique. You could either disagree with us by adopting another system, like Imam al-Tahawi disagrees with the Shafi school and becomes Hanafi. Okay. And then he disagrees with the Hanafi school while agreeing with the usul. So Imam al-Tahawi, he is Hanafi, and he will adopt the position of the Sahibain or adopt the position of the Imam based on ijtihad, but he is Hanafi though. So he's saying, I have shifted research method. I am now Hanafi. Okay, I'm within your research method, and I'm going to agree or disagree within your system. I'm working with your usul and I'm working with your qawaid, but I agree or disagree, or I weigh up based within the system. but I'm not just lost, right? As opposed to the Salafi says, Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah analyzed through which processing system? Through the Quran and Sunnah. Habibi, the Quran and Sunnah is not a processing system. It's not a system. Astaghfirullah, that's kufr. Habibi, you're just dumb. I'm sorry. So the modern, what we see with modern Salafism, nobody saw that. Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab would have laughed at these people that what are you talking about? Because it's obvious that doesn't make any sense. That is like is exactly the person who comes along and says, solve this problem without a system. And I can't do that, can I? Right, right. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
It makes sense. I have a bit of a different scenario. Um,
Okay.
so I know a brother as a friend who's partial to the Zahiri madhhab, and he made the argument once that that he doesn't see the issue in on any given mas'ala to take the mu'tamad opinion among the four madhahib and then go with the one that's most convenient or the most easiest. Because it's a you know that it's a you know that it's the relied upon opinion in the madhab, and then the deen is meant to be easy. You know it's valid. So then what's the issue?
Yeah, but that's not criticizing, is it?
Hmm.
So that's like for me, I come up to you and I say, Jawad, I want to start my website. Okay. So I'm like, oh, so you're thinking in your world, which is coding, language, usability, this, that, adaptability, da, da. You're thinking at a really high level, and I come along and say, hey, which one's the cheapest, bro? And you're like, oh, just take this one. Like, that wasn't a criticism. That wasn't a scholarly criticism of anything that's in your head. That's just a layman interacting with on a lay level. Does that make sense?
Yes.
He's not saying it's right, it was wrong. So that's totally fine. So this is the issue. Like, you don't even pray. You can't be bothered. And you teach Hanafi fiqh, right? You're a Hanafi fiqh teacher who understands Hanafi fiqh. You don't apply, you don't pray witr, you pray fard when you wake up, whenever you want. You intentionally do haram stuff, like whatever. You're much less of a shaitan than somebody else who comes along and says, excuse me, that just kind of says this is right, this is wrong. Because the person says this is right, this is wrong, you are breaking the most fundamental systems that exist in the world, right? Like who came along and said you can do research without a research methods, right? Like you're doing a master's, have you done a course in research methods? Yes, you have to do that, right? You might do that in the undergraduate as well, right? And so you had no research method. That's how ridiculous it is, right? Or coding without a language. So Jawad just walks into the office and is like, I don't know what to say. Like literally, you fired everybody and you brought on a bunch of people who are coding and they don't know a single language. And they're like, no, we code based on the Salaf. That's not a code. Or we code in noughts and zeros and ones, right? They think doing zeros and ones. And you're like, I don't understand why on earth did management fire all of these people and then hire all of these people and they're literally there typing zeros and ones. And the management's like, yeah, is it going to work? And everyone's like, yeah, it's going to work. It's going to work. You're like, this is crazy. That's exactly what happened. We, the manager, right, we've come along and said, oh, just follow Dalil. And you're like, yeah, but he doesn't have a code. He's writing in no code. He's just writing zeros and ones. And he says, isn't, this whole thing zeros and ones, right? Like I watched The Matrix, zeros and ones, right? And you're like, oh my God. Like, if people are either painfully stupid or insane, one of the two. And that's exactly what happened. That's what it is. So I remember seeing this with my own eyes in Mecca, right? There's this mufti sitting there, waiting for a question. He's reading, he's reading the Muhalla ibn Hazm. So are you Hanbali or are you Zahiri or are you Shafi'i? These are three different systems. So someone like Ibn Uthaymeen is Hanbali. He's Hanbali, right? Ibn Uthaymeen is Hanbali, right? Someone like Sheikh Albani is neither nor, right? He just has some kind of a few loose rules, some like a Hawaiinis, these kind of people, right? Like, so there's a big difference between somebody who's Hanbali and disagrees with the Hanbali school internally, right? That happens all the time in the Shafi school, as opposed to somebody you're not even using any language whatsoever. Okay, so as long as he says they're all valid, right? And I want to follow whichever is convenient for me, totally fine, not a problem. It's all halal, right? So if Ibn Hajar mentions this, he says, "Walau tashahiyan," you can do that. Now, where's the problem, right? So, uh, so I have a question for you. I don't know anything about coding. Can I, in principle, can I use any language?
Yeah, in most cases you could.
Right. Okay. So right now, I'm going to start coding right now on my new website. So what immediate problem will happen right now?
I guess you need to pick a framework in which you'd want to use to build the website first.
Okay. Do I know any coding? I don't know anything. So in
Okay.
principle,
So you need to
Habibi,
learn yeah, you need to learn coding concepts first.
so learn coding. So but I can do that in like 2 minutes, right?
No, it would be more hands-on. You have to learn algorithms. You have to learn
Okay. So
yeah.
I'm just trying to change one thing on my website. I want, for example, when somebody says register, I get an email. So I can do that in like 30 seconds, right? I can like learn, I could compare, for example, um, four or five different codes and learn how to do it and just do it, right? In about 30 seconds.
No.
Okay, half an hour.
No, it'd be a much more complex system than
Okay,
that.
in a week.
I don't think so. I think it would
Okay,
to
in a month.
learn going from scratch to that would probably take you anywhere from 6 months to a year.
Okay, in a year. So within 1 year, I can do that, right?
Yes.
So, and all I was trying to do was trying to get it. I wanted to compare the different ways that I can get this thing where they click on my website, and my website already exists, right? Meaning there's
Hmm.
already a whole structure in place, right? All I want to do is add this function where it allows me that when they click register, I get an email to this thing. That's all, right? It took me 6 months to do that. And you just did it while I was talking to you. You just did on ChatGPT, right? Like I was talking to you, I was like, "Oh, it's haram," and you're like, "ChatGPT, give me the different opinions in in Sunni Islam on marriage without witness." And you made a judgment about the Deen of Allah on ChatGPT, right? Which is the Salafi movement is not too different, right? It's not too different. It's basically the same thing. You're just winging it, like you're not doing a real job of it. You made a judgment based on halal and haram, something that would take a very long time to do, right? And you know from your project, your professional training in medicine, in programming, in politics, in life, in building, life is complex, right? Different ways to build a house, different ways to design. Like you're not an idiot, Habibi, right? You've been to school. You know that things are complex. Why isn't the deen complex as well? Why doesn't it require expertise? Why do you think it, why do you treat it as something that's so hayyin, that's so pathetic, that could be just quickly chat GPT it, right? It's not that, it's super complex, just like everything else in life, right? So you come along and just start weighing up positions. It's like it's just stupid. Like it's just stupidity. Nobody in the 18th or 17th or nobody would ever do that. Nobody accept that. It's obvious that that doesn't make any sense. Suddenly we're in the 20th and 21st century. Oh yeah, it's acceptable. Sheikh so and so gives a fatwa, and we like him because he doesn't follow madhhab, right? We like him because he doesn't follow madhhab. He sounds good because he doesn't follow madhhab, because we think that the madhab is sectarianism, is sectarian. That's like saying that Jawad is specialized in doing these kind of things, and with this kind of language is worse than somebody who is just kind of a free-for-all person, right? Which doesn't make any sense. So we've been sold, we've hired the fool, and we've sacked the specialist. That's what we've done. That's how it works. And it's like silly, right? So if you're not trying to weigh the positions up, you just want to follow anybody, that's fine. You do whatever you want. right? But the issue then is even when you're saying I can follow any madhhab, okay? It also, if I could follow any madhhab, would it take a while to understand what that answer actually is? Yes, right? So you're talking to your tax advisor. Often you don't understand what he's saying, right? Like he says, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And you're like, I don't understand what you're saying. Which one should I do? Right? Often that's the case. So when you say, for example, the Maliki school does not stipulate witnesses for marriage. Stop a second, Habibi. What do the Malikis actually mean by that? So you're gonna have to go to a Maliki and say, listen, I want to get married without witnesses. Tell me the whole thing from beginning to end. The whole thing from beginning to end. It's not that simple, right? Because I need to stipulate this, stipulate that. What are the criterion? It's not simple. So can I follow any madhab? That's fine. Not a problem. On any given issue, that's fine. You need to know what you're doing. Because otherwise, you actually just doing the wrong thing, right? This happens in exercises. This happens in politics. This happens in mechanics. This happens in education. Can I shift from one model of teaching to another model of teaching at this age with students? You can. You need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just a joke. Okay. So we're at this stage, and let's go back to this now. So here we have these people who are initiates, they are graduates, and they disagree, right? So, and then there's kind of things that are a bit of both, right? Every now and then you'll find people disagreeing anyway. But with the former Muhammads, like they don't really work on furu'. They don't work on, they're doing what's called al-khilaf al-ali, right? Does touching your wife break your wudu? As opposed to, well, if you say your wife and you said that the skin counts, but the nail doesn't and the hair doesn't, what about the inside of the gum? What about the inside of the cranium, right? What about this? What about that? Um, if you said this in marriage and that's an exception to the thing, what about this in that contract? Is it the same kind of thing? Is it different, etc., 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 right? So are they building, when you're saying expansion, we're doing kind of analogy and we're doing critique? These are kind of two different things. Okay, so now what happens is we find ourselves in the 5th century with two schools. Okay, with volumes and volumes and volumes. Like you could not, so right now I have one wall, basically two walls of Shafi'i fiqh. This is basically all the Shafi'i fiqh that exists. It's not that much. It's just like a wall, right? I don't know how many books there was, like 15 times 5 times 5. What's that? That's approximately how many books I have.
375.
15 times 5 times 5 is 375. So, okay, so 400 volumes of books. That's 400 volumes. It's not that much. When you see the tarajim, they're talking about the past, single authors would have more than that. They would say his own books were a library, right? So what we're talking about is volumes and volumes, thousands of volumes of Shafi fiqh, thousands of volumes of Shafi fiqh. Okay. Um, so there's a lot of works there, right? But we have these two schools. What are these two schools? We had the Persians, they're called al-Marawiza, Marawiza, Marawiza, or the Khurasaniyin. So Khurasan, right? This is northern Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, right? That area, very important cultural area, right? The Khurasaniyin and the Baghdadiyin, the Baghdadis, right? We're not saying that then the Shafis weren't anywhere else, right? But these were these two things. So basically now what you're going to have is, if you can imagine, who did you study with? Which books do you use? Which positions do you give, right? So now we have these two schools within one school, right? So the Marawiza will have certain positions, the Baghdadi, and a bit like today, Deobandi, Shami, right? It's kind of different books they'll use, different kind of things, right? Similar kind of idea, right? So now we have these two huge schools, okay? So the Shafi school now consists of Imam Shafi'i's fatawa, Imam Shafi'i's old fatawa, Imam Shafi'i, then the Ashab al-Wujuh, all these fatawa are new answers from the Ashab al-Wujuh, criticisms of other people, and all of this is being written in these multiple, right, thousands of volumes of Shafi fiqh, and it's being kind of passed on from generation to generation in which books do we teach, which books do we rely on, which shuyukh do we rely on, etc. Right? So we have the Marawiza, the or Khurasaniyin, and the Baghdadiyin. Okay? Then, so that's that stage there. Okay, does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we don't have much time left. Inshallah, we'll finish. Next stage then, um, so I always go on tangents there. I get very upset with the whole kind of Salafi movement because it just wastes a lot of time. Okay, so then we have the stage of editing. So this is kind of editing stage one, right? Editing stage one. So what happens now? We have Imam al-Haramain. This is Imam al-Juwayni. Passes away in the end of the 5th century. Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain, and then we have Imam al-Ghazali, who's actually Ghazali, by the way. You will say Ghazali, but it's Ghazali with two Z's, right? Al-Rafi'i, Nawawi, Isnawi, or Ibn Rif'ah. Uh, Isnawi. So what happens then is basically we have the Nihaya of Imam al-Haramain. So Imam al-Haramain, he attempts to join the two schools and write a book called Nihayat al-Matlab, all you'd ever want. So he gets the Mukhtasar Muzani, which is the textbook, the studying book of the school, right? And notice how the Mukhtasar Muzani begins with not doing taqlid. So the Mukhtasar Muzani begins with, this is a summary of the words of the summary of the fiqh of Imam Shafi'i, while bearing in mind that he told me not to do taqlid. So why on earth are you teaching fiqh if you don't want me to do taqlid? You should just open Sunnah Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi, right? So the answer is, in order to do ijtihad, you have to study fiqh, meaning you have to learn the ropes. You have to go through the ropes in order to become a mujtahid imam. In order to think independently, you have to think dependently. In order to do math, you have to make certain assumptions, right? In order to geography, you have to assume certain things, right? In order to look at physics, biology, you can't start questioning whether cells exist until you finish studying biology. Now you can question whether cells exist. But when you're studying biology, you have to do taqlid. Cells exist, animal cells, plant cells, assume certain paradigms, assume certain things, and then get to the end of it and say, I object to every single thing you ever said, which is fine. But you can't do that unless you're an initiate, unless you've gone through the system. So anyway, so he's quoting. He has a commentary on the Mukhtasar al-Muzani. It's called Nihayat al-Matlab. He attempts to join all the books together. Like this is all the material in the Shafi world. These are all the positions, and this is it. The issue, though, is in reality he doesn't have access to everything, and he's actually Khurasani more. So Imam al-Haramain and Imam al-Ghazali, they're actually more Khurasani than Baghdadi. Okay, so it doesn't really give a fair approach, right? So imagine, for example, a Deobandi explaining the difference of agreement between Deobandis and Shamis, right? So like, well, you're Deobandi, so kind of coming from one thing, maybe you don't have that whole picture. Or a Shami talking about Deobandis, like it's not going to be the whole picture, right? So anyway, with Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Ghazali, they do edit number one of the Shafi school. There's all these opinions, old school, new school, this school, da da da. What is the correct opinion, right? Imam Ghazali does the same thing in the Basit, the Kitab al-Basit. We don't have it, okay? He summarizes the Basit in the Wasit. We do have that, which is I have here in 7 volumes next to me, okay? The Wasit. The Wasit, he summarizes in the Wajiz, okay? And then Imam Rafi comes along and does a commentary on the Wajiz, okay? Which is called Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz. So Imam Rafi comes along does a commentary on that. Again, he's doing the same thing, but he has more access to more literature and is now a more of a balance between the Khurasaniyin and the Iraqiyin. So this is the Jadid, this is the old school, this is the new school, this is the this is the this, right? So you have to have a comprehensive knowledge of everything. B, understand that when you're mentioning two different things, one is not qualifying the other. It's actually a debate. Is it a debate between Imam Shafi and himself, or is it a debate between the early scholars? It's actually, he weighs it all up and he says, the relied upon new school is this, right? So I'm interested in what is the new school. And then if Imam Shafi doesn't have opinion and they've debated it over these thousands of scholars, what is the relied upon position, right? So this is kind of like the first real editing of the Shafi school, which is in the 7th century, right? And then along comes Imam Rafi'i. He also writes Al-Muharrar, which is then a textbook to study. So, and he also has another commentary on the Wajiz. He has a Sharh al-Saghir as well, which is a small commentary on the Wajiz as well. And then Imam Nawawi comes along and does the same thing again. He gets Imam Rafi'i's Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz. He summarizes it in Rawd al-Talibin and he tweaks certain things, right? Accepting that Rafi'i is the best edit of the Shafi school, just tweaks a few things here and there, right? Tweaks a few things. He gets the Muharrar of Imam Rafi and he writes the Minhaj al-Talibin. So he tweaks it. So he will say, da 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 da, qultu, I note. Where do I disagree? Right? Qultu, I note. Right? He just disagrees here and there, tweaks certain things. Right? So here it's 95% done. Here it's like 70 to 80% done. Okay, so here is Imam Nawawi saying, Imam Rafi has 95% done this job. I am now doing the next 5%. And I disagree here, and I disagree here, disagree there. Okay, so he writes the Minhaj Talibin, which is the new study work, right? Which will now become the new study work for the Shafi school, which is the Muharrar with some tweaks, right? He writes Rawd al-Talibin, which is the Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz, edited and tweaked. And then he writes a commentary on the Tanbih of Shirazi. So Shirazi is here. He's before Imam al-Haramain. So it's a textbook by Shirazi, Iraqi scholar, Baghdadi. He writes a commentary on it. So he writes, so not the Tanbih, on the Muhadhab. There's a Muhadhab by Shirazi. So he writes a commentary on that. And it's very, very large, the Majmu'. And it's doing the same thing. What are all the positions in the Shafi school on this issue? How do we tidy them up? What is right? What is wrong, etc. Can we go over? Because we need another 15 minutes, I think. So
I'm
minutes
good.
to leave. You know, I know it's like midnight for half of you. Um, but just another 15 minutes, inshallah. Along comes Ibn Rifa' and does the same thing. So Ibn Rifa' gets the Tanbih of Shirazi and writes a book called Kifayat al-Nabih, right? Kifayat al-Nabih. He does the same thing, gathering all the positions together, putting everything together and weighing things up and giving a tarjih. The issue is that Ibn Rifa' is not as good as Imam Nawawi. So his attempt over time is useful, is important, he's doing things, but this editing process is not as good as Imam Nawawi. So everybody sides with Imam Nawawi over Ibn Rifa'. Al-Isnawi comes along and critiques all three of them on their job. Where did Rafi'i make a mistake? Where did Imam Nawawi make a mistake? Where did Ibn Rifa' make a mistake? Right? And that's in the Kitab Al-Muhimmat by Al-Isnawi. Right? So he goes through, he goes through what's wrong with the Rawda, what's wrong with Imam Rafi'i, with Rafi'i's edition, and also what's wrong with Ibn Rifa' as well. Right? But again, useful contributions, valid, nice, but not as good as Imam Nawawi. So what happens then is at this point, then the Shafi'i school now shifts to the Nawawi school. We now have a textbook which has been Minhaj al-Talibin. We now have other works of Imam Nawawi, which is the Majmu', the Rawda, the Tahqiq, okay? And that is now the Shafi school. So the Shafi school now enters the final stage, editing number 2, right? Which is much easier from some ways because we're saying, I'm not interested in the Qadim, I'm not interested in Rafi'i, I'm not interested in Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Ghazali, I'm not interested in Khurasaniyin and all that stuff. All that was ages ago. Not interested in that. I'm interested in Imam Nawawi and on, right? So it's much easier to study the Shafi school. That's where the joke is. It takes 20 years to become a mufti in the Hanafi school, 7 years in the Shafi school. Because if you just stick to the late books, it's kind of simple, relatively simple. Whereas if I have to keep comparing, well, Ghazali's tarjih was this, and Imam Ghazali, no, Harami was this, and Ibn Rif'a said that, and Nawawi said that, and then you go back and al-Baghawi said that, it's like, oh my God, it's like this is going to be super, super hard, right? It's going to be very difficult if I have to keep going back to those old books, right? And so genuinely, I will not be going back to those old books by default, right? I'm not going to be doing that at all. It's just there historically half of the time. Okay, so now we are now at the post-Nawawi stage, right? Now, Imam Nawawi, like other people, like Imam Ghazali, like other people, again, he will sometimes work as a one of the former. He'll distribute the school. He'll have what's called an ikhtiyar. So he's doing two things at the same time. He is not expanding, but he is editing. So he's an editor of the Shafi school. That's role number one, and the most important role. Role number two, he's also a critique of the Shafi school. So he will disagree. He will have his own ikhtiyar. Just like Ibn Mundhir will have an opinion here and there, right? Or many opinions. Imam Nawawi will say, I disagree. I disagree. I disagree, right? But again, Imam Nawawi is a graduate of the Shafi school. So I repeat this conversation that I had with a very famous Salafi Sheikh in Jordan, Sheikh Muhammad Mashhoor, and he was like, "Why are you Shafi? Even Imam Nawawi left the Shafi school." So he doesn't understand the difference between disagreeing with the details while agreeing with the system versus disagreeing with everything. Does that make sense? Like he doesn't know that he didn't understand that. Like this is a sheikh, right? This is a famous sheikh, and I'm saying this on recording, right? It's going to go online. It was like there's a problem, right? There's a problem. There's a famous sheikh, Sheikh Hassan, where is he? Sheikh Hassan Mashhoor, Sheikh. I think his name is Muhammad Hassan Sheikh. I think Sheikh Hassan Mashhoor. I think his name is, or just Sheikh Mashhoor, or Sheikh Mashhoor ibn Hassan. Hassan. Yeah, Sheikh Mashhoor Hassan, right? Palestinian Jordanian Salafi scholar, right? Student of Sheikh Albani. So I spoke to him on the phone. This is what he said to me. He's like, why are you Shafi'i? Even Imam Nawawi left the Shafi school. So they fundamentally don't understand Islamic education, fundamentally don't understand what the madhhab are. So it's a huge problem, right? When somebody fundamentally doesn't understand something, their criticism is useless. Whereas when somebody understands something and they're internal, like Imam al-Ghazali critiquing, like Ibn Taymiyyah critiquing, Ibn Taymiyyah is inside, he's not outside, right? Where this is just, it's just sad. I don't want to say silly, but it's just sad. And then I have to listen to this person, or I'm going to refer to this person, right? It's just off. Like he didn't understand the difference between Imam Nawawi doing an ikhtiyar, meaning that is a useful critique, an internal critique, following the usul, following the qawaid, but disagreeing with this as a product of all of those years of being inside the Shafi school, versus somebody who just doesn't have a system to begin with, right? So there we go. So this is why I say the mujtahid, the independent thinker, he needs a madhhab more than anybody else. So your friend Jawad, who's like, yeah, I don't follow a madhhab, I just follow whatever's easy. You're much safer than somebody who is independently weighing positions up or independently thinking without a framework to do it in, without a research method, right? You have a huge problem. You have a really big problem. And then it's harmful for you, but it's worse for the people who come after you. Okay, so anyway, now the next stage is the post-Nawawi stage, right? The post-Nawawi stage. So we have Minhaj al-Talibin, which is our main textbook, Minhaj al-Talibin, okay? And then we have various commentaries. So you're going to find, I'm looking to my right now, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And you probably have hundreds of commentaries on Minhaj al-Talibin. So Minhaj al-Talibin becomes the new textbook. Okay. It is 99% reliable in that Imam Nawawi may have another opinion in the Rawda, in the Majmu', in the Tahqiq, right? But essentially, we're basically saying whatever Imam Nawawi says is right, okay? Most of the time. So now what's going to happen is you're going to have various scholars commentating. Subki, Al-Isnawi has a commentary on the Minhaj, Zarkashi, Al-Adhra'i, Al-Damiri, etc., and Mahalli. And then what's going to happen is it's all going to culminate, generally speaking, around kind of, so I'm going to stop here with just Mahalli because it's important. So Mahalli's commentary on Minhaj, which is very important. Mahalli, his student Zakaria Ansari, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria Ansari. Then we have his students, who are Al-Ramli, or Shihab ad-Din al-Ramli. Okay, and we have Shams ad-Din al-Ramli, Muhammad Shams ad-Din al-Ramli. Right, and we have Shihab ad-Din ibn Ahmad ibn Hajar, right? So Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. We have what? And then Al-Khatib al-Shirbini, Shirbini al-Khatib, Al-Khatib al-Shirbini. Okay, so now, so these are kind of like the beginning of the end now. This is the kind of like, this is editing, take two, right? This is where we are right now. Editing, take two. So we have the Sharh Mahalli on Minhaj al-Talibin, along with Hashia of Umayra or Amira. Somebody can double check for me. And Al-Qalyubi. Hashiyat Al-Qalyubi. So these Qalyubi and Umayra, these are kind of Egyptian scholars, generally going to follow Ramli as well. We have Zakari Ansari. He has key works, Asnan Matalib, which is a commentary on a summary of the Rabb Talibin. So Asnan Matalib. He has Al-Ghurar al-Bahiyya. These are large works. He has Al-Manhaj. So he didn't do a commentary of the Minhaj, but he did an ikhtisar of the Minhaj. So Al-Manhaj. Okay? He has also Tahrir Tanqih al-Lubab, which we're looking at, right? Tahrir Tanqih al-Lubab. Okay? So Asnan al-Matalib, which is essentially a kind of commentary on the Rabb Talibin, because it's kind of a commentary on a mukhtasar of it. Al-Ghurar al-Bahiyya, this is a commentary on a poem of a summary of
الحوي الكبير
yes, not of Harun Kabir, no. So
الصغير
Al-Harun
of
Kabir is Al-Mawardi, okay? That's something else. So this is we have the Sharh al-Kabir by Imam Rafi'i. Al-Qazwini comes along and does a summary of that. That gets turned into a poem, okay? And that poem gets a commentary by Zakaria Ansari. So this kind of goes back to Rawd al-Talibin as well, because Rawd al-Talibin is originally from Sharh al-Kabir, right? So both of these, they have quite a different genealogy than Minhaj al-Talibin, okay? So they're going to be masail is broader. They're much broader. The manhaj is the minhaj al-talibin. So this is manhaj al-talib. He tried to make it briefer, right? Which is from minhaj al-talibin. Okay. This then has his own commentary on it. So commentary of the author himself, Zakir Ansari. And then it has the hashia of al-Jamal and the hashia of what's his name? Of Abu Jayrami. Okay, these again Egyptian scholars. Abu Jayrami. Okay, so the commentary of Hashid Jamal on the Manhaj, which is the Mukhtasar of Minhaj al-Talibin, and Hashid Mujayrami as well. Okay, so can I put these in bold? I don't know if I can do that. I'll put these in blue, I think. No, can't do that. Change the whole thing. Anyway, these things are important. Can I underline them? I'll leave it for now because we're running out of time. So Hashid al-Jamal, right? So now think about my access points. My access point is Hashid Qalyubi. Hashid Umaira or Amira. I'm pretty sure it's Umaira. Okay?
I did a quick search and I just saw Amira over and over.
Okay, Amira. Okay, Jazak khair. It might be wrong though, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't change much, right? Hashiyat al-Jamal, right? This is late. Again, he's like 200-300 years ago. Hashid Bujayrimi, very late as well. Okay? Tahrir Tanqih al-Lubab, Hashiyat of Sharqawi. So Sharqawi, again, late Egyptian scholar. Right? The Egyptians are very important.
You are Sheikh, you are right. It was Umaira, it's not Amira.
There we go. Jazakum khair. Right? Because I think you guys you right, it is Umaira, but it doesn't matter, right? This is a classic mistake that some people will do. Oh my God, the sheikh doesn't even know the person's name. Is that relevant? Like, how relevant is it? Like, you don't know when he passed away exactly. So they come with like a lame argument, like, oh, you didn't even know when Imam Bukhari passed away. You don't know anything about the deen. It's like, that's called a straw man argument. Like, is it Amir or Umaira? Like, that really doesn't matter. Do I know what the madhhab is? And can I access it? Right? As opposed to you don't even know what the tradition is anyway, you can't access it. It's a totally different thing. So Hashid al-Sharqawi. So Sharqawi, late Azhari scholar, not super, again, like about 200 years ago, not that long ago. Sharqawi. So Sharqawi is quoted a lot, right? When you see him in Muqaddah Hadamiyya a lot, right? Sharqawi and others, okay? Then we have Shihab ad-Din al-Ramli. So what does he have? The main works that he has, I'm not going to mention everything, but the main works that he has, so this is, I'm not going to mention Shihab ad-Din al-Ramli actually right now. I'm going to skip that. We're going to go here. So here we have the Nihaya. Okay, Nihayat al-Muhtaj. Nihayat al-Muhtaj. Nihayat al-Muhtaj. Sharh al-Muhtaj. So again, he's not coming out of nowhere. There is 20 million commentaries before him. He's getting all of these commentaries. He's studying it with Zakir Ansari. He's studying with his father, Shihab ad-Din Ramli, and he's tweaking. Okay, everybody is tweaking. They're not coming out of a vacuum. Okay, this has two hashias, the hawashi of the Nihaya. So the hashiyat al-Rashidi, hashiyat al-Rashidi. Okay, and al-Maghribi. Okay, so today when you ask me a question, this is where I'm going to go to, right? Hashit Rashidi, Hashit al-Maghribi. Okay. Then I have Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. He has Tuhfat al-Muhtaj, right? Very, very important. Arguably the most reliable book in the Shafi school, right? The relied upon position. And then we have Ash-Sharwani, Hashit al-Sharwani, who is from? Who knows where he's from? This is the teacher of Sharwani is the teacher or the student of Bajuri. I can't remember now. I think he's the teacher. And he is from Dagestan. Sharwani is Dagestan. Right? Sharwani and Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi. Okay? So today, you ask me a question, I'm not going to look here first. right? There's also two other hashes that they recently came out. I don't know what they're called, Sumbati and something else. I just got them recently, so they're not that famous, but they are as well. So okay, so then we have. So I'm going to look here, right? And usually the Qalyubi, because he's Egyptian, is going to be following Imam Ramli as well. I'm going to look here, Egyptian. He's following Imam Ramli. So tweaks on that, details that I need. Imam Ramli. Sharqawi is going to be Ramli with tweaks, right? Al-Maghribi and Al-Rashidi, not necessarily. They're commentating on Nihaya of Imam Ramli, but they don't necessarily agree with him, right? Sharwani as well, they may or may not agree, right? Khatib al-Shirbini, he has a number of books. So he has a commentary on the Tanbih. He has Mughni al-Muhtaj, Mughni al-Muhtaj. And he has the Al-Iqna', which is a commentary on Matan Abi Shuja', Al-Iqna'. Okay? This has an important hashia of Bujayrami as well. Hashiyat of Bujayrami. So you say Bujayrami, you mean his hashia Bujayrami, his hashia on the Iqna' or his hashia on the Manhaj. Okay? So again, these are key access points. Bujayrami, Sharwani, Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi, Al-Maghribi, Rashidi. This is how I'm accessing this whole tradition. Hashid Sharqawi, right? Hashid Jamal, Hashid Bujayrami, right? Sheikh Hassan, Sheikh Hamza Karamani would use the Hashid Jamal a lot when he was teaching Reliance Traveler. Qalyubi, right? I would start with Qalyubi though, because he's kind of earlier. Umayra, I wouldn't start there though, because not necessarily always accurate. But here, you know, then we have
Sheikh,
yes,
doesn't the two commentaries Hashiyat and they come together, Qalyubi and Umayr?
yes, they're usually printed together, yeah.
Oh.
So now he also has a number of other works, Ibn Hajar, but I'll just mention some of them. He has Al-I'ab, which does not exist, and we keep seeing that again and again in the Muqaddimah Hadramiyah, in the Sharh. Al-I'ab, we don't have it, it's not printed, very important, which is a commentary on the Ubab of Al-Muzajjad, which is a kind of summary of Rawd al-Talibin as well, Al-I'ab, which is important, referred to, quoted a lot, which is we don't have access to it. And then he has a commentary on the Sharh of Al-Muqaddimah Hadramiyah. Muqaddimah al-Hadramiyah. Okay? On which there is the Hashia of al-Kurdi. Okay? And the Hashia of Tarmasi or At-Tirmisi. I don't know what it is. You can double check with me. Tarmasi or At-Tirmisi. So this is an Indonesian scholar, right? Who is, I believe, in Mecca, right? Tirmisi or Tarmasi. So again, access point. You have a question? I'm going to Hashia Tarmasi on Ibn Hajar's commentary on Muqaddimah Hadramiyah. Kurdi, right? I'm looking here. I'm looking here. I'm looking here. I'm looking here, 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 here. That is my deen, right? This is a really important thing to understand. There are other sources as well, okay? But basically, we'll stop there. Why is this important? Because the Shafi'i school is a vignette, is a picture, is a sketch of Ummat Muhammad sallallahu Allah yahfadhum, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you come along 100 years ago, 200 years, 300 years ago, and your access to the deen is this. Your access to the deen is Bujayrami. He is Islam. Or the Hanafi version of it, or the Maliki version of it, or the Hanbali version of it, or the Tajweed version of it, right? Zakaria Ansari's commentary on the Jazariya by Imam Jazari, same thing. It's the whole story, right? Access points, right? Hadith as deemed authentic by so-and-so and as explained by so-and-so. If we don't know our Turath and we don't know how to access the Turath, we have no Turath. If we don't understand how the deen has been preserved and the stages and the developments and this book and this book and this book and how to access it, we do not have a deen. So how do you destroy the deen? How do you destroy the deen? You say, who's Bujayrami? Who's this guy? He doesn't know anything about hadith. right? He's one of these late Ashari weird people. He's probably Sufi too, you know? So what you do is you straw man these people. You come along and say, who's Tirmidhi? The guy's not even Arab, for crying out loud. Who's Al-Kurdi? Okay? Um, who are these people? So you take this whole system apart and you say Kurdi is not a mujtahid. I want to be like Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi. Habibi, you want to access Muhammad Nasr al-Marwazi? Ahlan wa sahlan marhaban bikum. But mashan Allah, for crying out loud, the access points. The access points. In order for you to access the Quran, you're going to have to go to Mullah Ali Qari, to Jazariya, and go Jazariya. Where's Jazariya from? Jazariya comes from this. And now you can recite Quran. But you have no Quran without Mullah Ali Qari and without Ibn Zakaria Ansari, without these access points. Okay? Super important. That is your deen. That is your deen. Right? So this is a 100% analogy. So you don't care about Bujayrami. Who is he anyway? He just he's a muqallid. Forget him. Who's Tirmidhi? Who's Kurdi? Right? Who's a Sharwani? Who's al-Maghribi? Right? That is your access to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have no other access at all. You don't have another access. And if you try and circumvent these people and you go around these people, you're going to stumble. Who's Imam Bukhari? What's Sahih Bukhari? I just want the deen, I just want sunnah. There is no access to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ without Imam Bukhari. And there's no access to Bukhari without Ibn Hajar. And there's no access to Ibn Hajar without etc. So you are trying to circumvent all these things. You can't. The only way to the Salaf is through the Khalaf. I'll repeat it 3 times. The only way to the Salaf is through the Khalaf. The only way to the Salaf is through the Khalaf. And what have you done? You've turned your back on the Khalaf and you have no access to the Salaf anymore. You don't even know what you're talking about. You don't understand the discussion because you have not gone through the right access points. You're trying to use the computer without logging in. It's not going to work. So you're taking the computer and you're using it as a tennis racket. That's not how the computer is used. You need to type. You need to log in. Click here. And then you can go ahead and you can use the computer for what it is. And it's a very useful computer. It's a very robust system. But you don't know your access points in this madhhab. You don't know what a madhhab is. You don't know what tafsir is. You don't know what this is. And you're just lost. Right? Dallu wa adallu. You're astray and that's it. You just know what you're doing. As opposed to sanad. Where do you go through? I go through this person, and I'm back to Imam Nawawi, back, and I've accessed the deen. And I have a system and I have knowledge. And now I can agree or disagree and I can meaningfully interact with the Salaf. Otherwise, you cannot meaningfully interact with the Salaf. Am I making sense?
Yes.
So if you cut these specific people out, you don't have an access point, you don't have anything. Right? So now functioning as students, today when I say madhhab, the Shafi'i school, I'm saying Qalyubi said this. I'm saying Umayra said this. I'm saying Hashid Jamal says this. Bujayrami, Sharqawi, right? I'm saying Maghribi said this. Rashidi said this. Sharwani said this. Ibn Abbad, Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi, Kurdi, Tirmidhi, etc. These are where I'm going to go, right? This is what I'm going to do, right? I'm not actually even particularly interested in what Zakaria Ansari said because I'm interested in what his student said because they are my access to him. When do I open the Kitab al Never. Right? Physically, right now, I am in a zone. I have my books here, right? I have my books here. Notice the hadith are actually in another room, right? My hadiths are in another room. Because I'm not picking up, when you ask me a question, I'm not going there because that's not my access point. That's not my access point. I'm going to go there afterwards. And I get to that through this. But they don't understand that. Right? They don't understand. They want the dessert without having the main meal. They want to, I don't know. They want to have the dessert without picking up the spoon. The spoon is the door to the dessert. Subhanallah. Right? They want to go inside the fun house without paying the ticket. You don't have fun then. Doesn't work. Okay? Makes sense, inshallah? So what we're going to be trying to do in this class then is join between this access point and also seeing a little bit of the past as well. So we do like half an hour of Lubab, Muhammadin, you see, whoa, there's different opinions and what's going on here. And then we're going to jump forward to Sharqawi on Tahrir Tanqih al-Lubab by Zakaria Ansari. Make sense, inshallah?
Okay.
Okay. Inshallah, we'll stop here. My apologies, it's past midnight for some of you. May Allah reward you and give us patience, inshallah. We'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jazakum khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.